employees are experimenting with some sort of AI application. And the companies have no idea what these people are using. They have no idea how to control their usage of AI. They have no idea what kind of data is being uploaded to all these AI applications, which are going to use that data to train themselves to get better. So we have gone out and launched a series of products that allow you to monitor how AI is being used, to make sure your data does not get out there and train models if you don't want it to, give you some visibility as to what's happening. At the same time, if you're trying to deploy an AI application, we have capability to give you a ring-fence security around your AI applications to give you an AI firewall. So that, coupled with the fact that we've infused AI into many of our products, has allowed us to deliver $200 million of ARR so far in the category of AI security, which we think is an industry first and really gives us comfort that this thing's going to do well for us.
Just give us the bird's eye perspective, though, because the whole market is grappling with the idea of whether the amount of money going into AI in terms of infrastructure is a long-term return that they're going to be getting from. Do you think there's hype within AI adoption, or do you see that actually the level of adoption from yours is showing that this is real?
Well, Caroline, I was an internet analyst in the late 90s, and I remember the hype that we saw with the internet, and everything went up and to the right very quickly. Look forward, 25 years later, everything was real. I think so. The question is not whether it's real. The question is what's the timing of it, and how do you invest in a manner that is consistent with the timing of return. So from our perspective, yes, we expect that there will be widespread usage of AI. We think AI will fundamentally change how we all conduct business. The question is, what is the timing of it? And the problem is you can't go ahead and execute on it if you don't build the infrastructure. So I think, yes, we have to have infrastructure. Now, whether it's the right amount of infrastructure being built at this point in time or not, I'm no one to comment. But I do believe that there's going to be a phenomenal amount of consumption, deployment of AI, and we're going to be talking AI for a very long time.
Nikesh Arora, CEO of Palo Alto Networks. It's great to have you back here on Bloomberg Technology. Thank you very much. Now, US cyber firms are warning that proposed regulations in Hong Kong could grant that government unusual access to the firm's computer systems. The warning comes from a number of tech groups that do business in Hong Kong, including Amazon, Google, and Meta. Hong Kong officials say the proposed rules are designed to protect critical infrastructure from cyber attacks. Karen.
Coming up, Ed. Brace yourself. We're going macro. The rate cuts that we're anticipating to come, what does it mean for VCs? Well, Bradley Tusk is joining us on how VCs are preparing for the world around them to change. First, though, where else is changing? Europe, when it comes to who is building chip manufacturing equipment and indeed breaking ground. A German plant by TSMC starting today, 10 billion euro German plant. This is all about the chip war and wanting to bring supply chains closer to home amid that US-China tension. We're off by 2% though on TSMC's depository receipts. This is Bloomberg Technology. just look ahead to Jackson Hole, which is this week, and get a read on venture capital's view of a potential rate cut from the Fed, and if it would help the industry. Tusk Ventures CEO and co-founder Bradley Tusk joins us now for today's VC Spotlight. And so, is the macro picture all-encompassing right now? Are you factoring in rate cuts and an energized VC community?
Yeah, look, we absolutely need something to change the way the market has been the last few years. There's been a terrible lack of liquidity in the VC market really since 2021, and we're waiting for something to shake it loose. So interest rates cuts are certainly part of that equation. The less attractive fixed income is, the more the venture may look good as an alternative. I think the election is the other big one, right? And it's not that President Biden has necessarily been bad for venture capital, but there really, other than in his first year, has just been no liquidity at all. So seeing a change in president, a change in regulators, a new SEC chair, a new FTC chair, I think can only help.
It's interesting that we have had big valuation cuts from the public side when it comes to some of the losses we've seen prior to what have now been a run-up in the markets. I think of who this has hurt, a lot of them the Tiger Cubs, for example, some of the hedge funds. We just had the news that one key Tiger Cub goal is closing his $11 billion firm. That's citing some health issues. How much turnover do you expect to see in public investment and private investment when it comes to VC and public equities?
A lot, because one, too many funds were raised during kind of the boom period of, say, 2017 to 2021. Too much money was raised. The reality is, so we're early stage investors. We do seed and Series A. Our average check size is about $5 million. I don't need a $300-400 million early stage fund. Sure, that makes me more money in management fees, and it transfers the risk from me to my LPs, but that's not good for them, and it doesn't help us make a lot of carry. And so the reality is you don't need funds that are so big, and the reason why companies were so wildly overvalued is VCs raised funds that were way too big, and they couldn't write a check for, say, $5 million. It had to be for $15 or $20 million, and the valuations had to then be increased commensurately. So everything was way out of whack, and it would get to the public markets, and they would cut the valuation by 60-70%, rightfully so. A lot of private tech companies can be very valuable, but that doesn't mean that WeWork should be worth $40 billion, right? It was probably never more than a $1 or $2 billion company. And so there's probably a return to rationality to the market. But with that said, when there's no liquidity at all, what you see is a significant decline in early stage investment. And then that reduces new company formation, new technology development, growth. So you want more rational valuations, but you also want a lot more activity.
Bradley, I'd love to help our Bloomberg Technology audience kind of understand a bit what it's like to be a venture capitalist in the context of a liquidity crunch like you talked about. So if you're a VC and you have all these opportunities on your desk, term sheets that you want to sign, why is this environment and a pending rate cut a challenge? What changes mechanically?
Yeah, well, look, when there's no liquidity, you have a few problems. One, you can't recycle proceeds. So what happens typically for us is we'll have liquidity within a fund, and then we'll use that money because the fund period hasn't completed yet to reinvest back into again. So that creates more economic activity all around. Two, when there's more liquidity, your LPs are seeing returns and they're re-upping for new funds. So there's more activity happening there as well. Everything is moving at a much more conservative, slower pace when there's no money going out the door to anybody on any side. So it just slows everything down considerably. And then the other problem is the temptation around AI, right? So the one place where valuations have remained really, really high is in the AI sector. And yes, is there a lot of long-term potential in the space? Of course. But, we keep seeing companies with $1 or $2 million in revenue asking for $100 million valuations, and that's just crazy.
Bradley?
Yes.
I don't mean to cut you off, we're short of time. The presidential election, which candidate is the candidate of the entrepreneur and of the venture capitalist?
I mean, ultimately, I am supporting Harris. I have given Harris a considerable amount of money because I believe that having stable markets and a government that is somewhat trustworthy and functional is ultimately a lot better than the chaos of Trump.
Tusk Ventures CEO and co-founder Bradley Tusk, I appreciate you answering that. Thank you very much.
Appreciate it.
A big story in the world of video games, Black Myth Wukong. It's a Chinese-made game backed by Tencent, and it's become the second most popular title ever on Steam within hours of its launch today, with more than 2 million concurrent players. That's more than other hyped single-player titles like Cyberpunk and Elden Ring, games I've played. That's all data according to this tracker Steam DB. All right, coming up on the show, we're going to hear from Fubo TV CEO David Gandler reacting to the company's shares which surge after a judge blocked Fox and Disney's sports streaming service. That conversation's next. This is Bloomberg Technology.
On Bloomberg.
Edgar Bronfman Jr. has formally submitted a $4.3 billion bid to take control of Paramount Global and quash an existing offer from Skydance Media. That's according to a Bloomberg source. Bronfman is expected to argue that his proposal is superior because it will result in less dilution for Paramount's non-Redstone shareholders. We'll keep tracking it. Caro.
We should. Meanwhile, of course, Fubo TV soaring after Fox, Warner Brothers, Discovery and Disney were blocked by a judge from launching their streaming sports service just 1 week out before its rollout. Fubo TV CEO David Gandler joined Bloomberg yesterday to react to the news. Just take a listen.
Is that the consumer is the big winner today. The joint venture attempted to deprive consumers of choice and affordability. It attempted to eliminate competition and manipulate pricing. And I think the evidence was quite clear, given that the bar is so high, and we're just happy the judge has agreed with us.
So it's likely that Venue will make its case again before the court. What are you going to be doing before then? Because it's not clear how long this injunction will last.
Well, we don't have a date yet set for the trial, which could be in 2025 or 2026. Fubo today is focused on the fall sports calendar. We're not focused on any potential appeal. Pun intended, ball is in their court. So we'll continue to focus on our business and continue to, achieve profitability as we have forecasted in 2025.
I am curious, David, too, about the structure of that Vino deal. There was some discussion, I guess, based on the reporting coming out of the hearings that led up to the ruling. This idea that they were asking, I don't know if it was specifically you, but they were asking some of the rivals that they would, in addition, if they wanted the sports programming, they also had to take additional programming as well. Is that true?
Yeah, that's correct. I think one of the arguments that we were attempting to make is that not only were there excessive above market rates that we were dealing with, excessive penetration rates, which is the number of subscribers that gain access or have access to each of the networks, which obviously comes at a higher cost, but it's also the bundling of unwanted channels to access must-have sports programming. Those are the sort of key elements of the trial, and again, we believe that we're able to provide the judge with sufficient and credible evidence for her to judge in our favor.
That was Fubo TV CEO David Gander. Let's discuss what this means for the future of sports streaming with Paul Pastor, co-founder and chief business officer of the cloud-native platform QuickPlay, but also a former Disney Plus and Hulu executive. You're an alum of Disney Plus and Hulu. You have some direct history with Venue. Your reaction to the comments there?
Sure. Thank you again for having me. Listen, I agree and disagree with David's statement on terms of what's happening for the consumer. I agree that the court essentially laid out an argument that said it was unfair to have the practice that that they could not avail themselves, that being Fubo, of the market rates that the Venue venture was having. And importantly, they couldn't unbundle the networks that were part of that venture. However, for consumers, they also lose. This ability to aggregate the offering, to be able to offer new discovery tools, these are things that consumers want and are seeking out. And so this is both a win for the consumer and the fact that David's pushing for more availability and more pricing flexibility within the bundle, but also a loss in terms of the innovation that could be applied against the sports bundle in general.
Paul, regular viewers of this program know that I'm a passionate, long-standing Chelsea season ticket holder. So for football, I've got Peacock. I've got CBS if we were ever to get back into Europe. I've got Sling so I can get Fox Sports. Why do I need Venue?
You and I are alike. I also am a huge fan of the Tennis Channel, and I have to buy through a cable package in order to get to my Tennis Channel. Listen, I agree. I think actually one of the hardest value propositions here is to communicate to a consumer that this bundle and Venue actually doesn't deliver all the sports that they're looking for. Mm-hmm. It's only an efficient way to consume the things that are in those channels. Now, this was a very strong value proposition when we did this with Hulu, with ABC, Fox, and NBCU at the time. So there is value that can be created. There is an ability to speak to the broader offering and how it competes, but most certainly it doesn't solve all the problems of how you actually manage your sports rights.
Yeah, add in their NBA rights moving to Amazon. Paul, paint a picture of what then the next spring season, what ultimately sports looks like, how we're going to best interact with it, do you think, via streaming?
Sure. So listen, I think that right now what we saw, right, the NBA just came to market. And what we saw clearly was that Amazon came in and understood that there was a place for them to play in this, and ultimately streaming rights will now go to Amazon in addition to being shared across a number of other services. Right. What this ultimately means is there's strong value in sports. It's a live event. It delivers huge impact to both advertising and to potentially ancillary businesses that are being managed. The challenge is that for consumers, it's still going to remain a very difficult landscape to navigate. And while the Venue package certainly looked to bring together some of those rights and offer at least a more efficient way to be able to consume a certain amount of those sports rights, it doesn't solve the ultimate problem of having to navigate across multiple services, seek out where they might be.
The struggle's real for sports lovers. Paul Pastor, we thank you so much, co-founder and chief business officer at QuickPlay. Some great expertise there. Meanwhile, that does it for this edition of Bloomberg Technology, Ed.
Fantastic show. Don't forget to check out the podcast for the recap. You know where to find it. Bloomberg and online and Apple, Spotify and iHeart. From the team over in New York City and here in San Francisco on the West Coast, this is Bloomberg Technology.
From the world of politics to the world of business, this is Balance of Power. Live from the Democratic National Convention in Chicago.
From the Democratic National Convention in Chicago to our TV and radio audiences worldwide. Welcome to Balance of Power. Alongside Kaylee Lines, I'm Joe Matthew.
Thank you. I love you.
Day two of the convention. Delegates recovering from a very late night in that hall as Joe Biden delivered his address that went late, described as emotional. He did wipe a tear during a very long standing ovation. Kaylee, that was the moment that many in this administration had been waiting for, and of course tease up Kamala Harris for her acceptance speech on Thursday night.
Yeah, and of course, before we can get there, there's more speakers lined up this evening. We'll be hearing from both Obamas, former President Barack Obama and his wife, the former First Lady Michelle Obama, and the second gentleman, Doug Emhoff, will be speaking here in Chicago at the United Center this evening. But at the same time, Kamala Harris and Tim Walz will actually not even be in the state of Illinois. They're heading to Milwaukee to Wisconsin and the Pfizer Forum, which of course was the scene of the Republican National Convention last month.
Yeah, a little interesting bit of programming. They are spending every night in Chicago, but leaving town for this one, day two, with the theme, A Bold Vision for America's Future, as the Democratic Party tries to deliver the message that they're turning the page.
Yeah, and the question is, to what extent will they have success doing so in this packed convention week? Bloomberg's Hadriana Lowenkron is here with us in Chicago, covering it all along with our wonderful team of Bloomberg reporters, and she's joining us now here on set. So obviously there is a lot of pomp and circumstance surrounding this. We will see that again this evening. What we will not see is Harris and Walz in the box where they were last night. Can you just walk us through the thinking of the campaign here to not be present on night two of the convention when so many members of the party are taking the floor to speak?
Right, it does seem a little odd, especially when you compare things to, I was in the RNC in Milwaukee and Trump was there pretty much the whole week. But again, I think this really goes to the point where the Harris campaign really feels they are the underdog. They're not taking anything for granted. And so yes, they are out campaigning. They were in Pennsylvania before the convention began. They're heading Milwaukee, they're hitting the swing states. And I think that also comes as, important to note that this comes as Trump will be doing a lot of counter-programming this week, hitting several swing states and making a visit to the border in Arizona. So again, the Trump campaign is trying to make that contrast. So the Harris campaign is still saying here, we're traveling, we're hitting the swing states, we're not taking our voters for granted.
Well, it is also fair to say that in the past, you might not see the nominee until the final night of the convention, but we'll see how this plays out this evening. I do want to ask you about Joe Biden last night, though. There's been a lot of talk about run of show, the fact that he didn't get on TV sets on the East Coast or computer screens until 11:30 at night. That was an interesting moment for him, a very emotional one. How come it went so late?
Well, that's a great question. We know that a lot of the speeches did run pretty long. We know that a lot of it also came from the fans in the arena. I mean, Hillary Clinton, minutes, 3, 4, 5 minutes before they were speaking, before she was set to speak, just roaring applause. And so the crowd was very energized. We also know that there were protests out kind of during the events that took place earlier on in the evening. We know that that was kind of cited as one of the reasons for a bit of the delays. They did have to move some things around. And, people were nervous. Biden has tended to not do as well the later in the evening events have taken place. We know this is reminiscent of the late night debate. But, he was able to speak for nearly an hour. I think he did what he needed to do. He was teary. I mean, this is a very bittersweet moment for him. It's very non-traditional, passing the reins over to Harris. And he spoke a bit about his record, but he also did say he was ready to be, I think the quote was, he's ready to be the best volunteer for the Harris-Walz campaign. And, to your point earlier about the weird kind of Harris dynamic, Harris did actually make a surprise appearance on Tuesday, on Monday, and we are, again, excited. Everyone is ready to see her on Thursday to formally accept the nomination.
Well, when we think about Harris Harris being in that room with President Biden speaking last night, someone who wasn't physically in the room, but very much it felt like the center point of the majority of the speeches is the former President Donald Trump. Joe Biden mentioned him by name probably dozens of times, realistically. Trump himself is counter-programming this convention, too. He's going to be in Michigan today. What is the Trump campaign strategy as Democrats try to put on the show of unity Republicans were trying to put on in Milwaukee last month?
They're really trying to get Harris to do some more unscripted settings. We know that everyone speaking throughout the convention has a teleprompter. This is something that the Trump campaign is really hoping to kind of goad Harris into taking more questions from reporters, doing a sit-down interview, which she said she would do at the end of the month. In addition to Trump himself counter-programming throughout the week, he has surrogates who are here in Chicago every day holding a press conference where they themselves are taking questions. I was there on Monday. And I think the important kind of contrast here is, again, they're trying to say they acknowledge the polling, that there has been a bump in enthusiasm. The campaign is saying they expected that. They think that a plateau has been reached. And now they're thinking the more that voters will get a chance to see Harris, the more that enthusiasm will wane. And they will the Trump campaign will start to see those numbers go up. So they're hoping that the more opportunities there are for Harris to speak to the press, maybe trip up when discussing policy, that'll be the place where the Trump campaign then can jump in and make up some ground.
We're going to be hearing from Donald Trump in Howell, Michigan, a little bit later on today, talking about crime. This is one of the issues, including the economy, a few others, the border, that poll really well for Republicans. This is a message that's been sticking here in a place like Chicago. Are you hearing about that from Democrats? Are they acknowledging this?
Yes, excellent question. I mean, crime is definitely something that the Trump campaign is working. They're actually using it as a way to say this is their way to get women voters as well, which we know they are not having as much luck with compared to the Harris campaign. When asked just at the press conference the other day about appealing to women voters, they pointed to crime and they're focused on that, saying, well, women want to feel safe, they want a secure border. But, you know, in contrast, the Biden-Harris campaign, the Harris-Walz campaign now, but also the Biden-Harris administration has also been pointing to the border. They've been, their main thing, and Biden, I think, mentioned it Monday night, was that they had this border bill, this bipartisan border bill, and that Trump then called up senators, and that was why the border bill was killed. So Biden pointed to that. The Democrats have been, pointing to that. So that's kind of their, counter messaging on the border.
All right, Bloomberg's Adriana Lowenkron, very busy here in Chicago. Thank you so much for joining us live on Bloomberg TV and radio. Now, as Adriana talks about some of the messaging from President Biden last night, and also is talking about women in particular, that is something that we heard from the incumbent president on the issue of diversity, not just for women, but all kinds of demographics across America.
In America, where the fundamental creed of this nation, that all of us are created equal, is still very much alive. And a broad coalition of Americans joined with me. 81 million voters voted for us, more than any time in all of history. Because of all of you in this room and others, we came together in 2020 to save democracy. As your president, I've been determined to keep America moving forward, not going back, to stand against hate and violence in all its forms, to be a nation where we not only live with but thrive on diversity, demonizing no one, leaving no one behind, and becoming a nation that we profess to be.
For more on that message and this convention as a whole, we're joined now by Congresswoman Katherine Clark of Massachusetts, the House Minority Whip. She's here with us in our studios in Chicago. Congresswoman, thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure.
Of course, we heard the president last night referring to diversity, talking, as we heard many, about the big tent in the Democratic Party. It is literally your job in the House to bring all those diverse forces together to be singing the same song. Can you just walk us through what it was like within the membership of the House to line everybody up behind what is now the Harris campaign, not the Biden campaign?
I have to say, out of all the tasks I've had as whip in the House for the Democratic Party, this was perhaps the easiest. People immediately gravitated to Kamala Harris and saw her as our standard bearer for all the things that we have worked on with her as vice president and her vision for the future. So whether that's lowering costs, whether it is growing the middle class, protecting our fundamental freedoms like reproductive freedom, Kamala Harris has been our partner, and that was truly just almost instantaneous, that movement from President Joe Biden to her candidacy, because we knew she was the candidate for the moment.
It's a very delicate thing we're witnessing, though, and witnessed last night to see Joe Biden talking to the delegates there. I know it went very late into the evening, but the people in the room weren't concerned about the time. Obviously, it had a rally feel to it, but there was a bittersweet, emotional feel to this. It happened so fast, Congresswoman. How does he feel when you talk to him? What kind of emotions was he experiencing?
You know, I think we saw it on display, a true pride. And what has always been a hallmark for Joe Biden is his gratitude to be able to serve. What an incredible quality in a politician and a leader. And it is what has made him a transformative president. That idea that there is a bigger calling here, that the American people are always at the center of his work, and it's at the center of this extremely patriotic decision. And so last night, he deserved every minute of those accolades from the crowd, that genuine affection for him, respect for the job and his service. And we look across the aisle at Donald Trump, and you see the exact opposite.
He says Democrats staged a coup.
It's a 180 because he cannot fathom giving up power for something bigger than himself. That is where Donald Trump is. It is always about how he will benefit, not how the American people will, not how the Democratic Party that is based on values will. So I'm sure he is wrestling with this moment, calling it a coup because he cannot understand it, because he could never do what Joe Biden did.
Well, Joe Biden has suggested his decision wasn't even as much about his ability to defeat Donald Trump, but instead the impact he could have, perhaps detrimentally, on House and Senate races and the ability for other Democrats to win. What has changed for the Democrats' odds of retaking the majority in the House since Harris assumed her role as the Democratic nominee? How many seats realistically do you think you can pick up now?
You know, I have always been bullish on the Democrats retaking the House because what we've seen are do nothing at best and real extremism that the American people are rejecting. And so what we're seeing is this incredible energy and momentum that we are going to turn into action. And in real time, that is meaning for our candidates have seen a surge in volunteers, of small first-time donors. When you get that $10, $15, $20 donation, that's a vote. That is a vote of confidence.
Does that translate into 10, 15 extra seats in the House, though?
Well, we certainly hope so, but my number is the whip, and I like to keep track of the numbers, is 218. That's our goal, to win that majority and be able to bring the voices of everyday people back into the process. What we have seen from the GOP is this complete focus on their own power, their own civil war that they're engaging in, and the American people feel like they're outside looking in. Well, we've continued to work with the Biden-Harris administration to bring down the cost of health care, cap insulin at $35 a month, take on big pharma and say it is time that people be able to afford their life-saving medication, make those investments in climate change that also are great for the economy. And all of that work was done and brought down our deficit at the same time. These are the kind of investments that we are going to build upon and continue to help families meet the very real challenges they're facing still in this economy with Kamala Harris.
The issue of Israel and its war against Hamas has been obviously a big one in this campaign, in the primary cycle, and it's brought some fissures to the Democratic conference in the House. We've got tens of thousands of protesters here in Chicago that have been part of the story. You've also got a couple dozen delegates who are not committed for this reason. How important, Congresswoman, will it be for the Biden administration, the Biden-Harris administration, to strike a ceasefire deal this week?
You know, it is all hands on deck, and they are working so hard to make sure that we end this war, that we have a ceasefire, that we can bring those hostages home, and that we can surge aid to Palestinian civilians who, through no fault of their own, have suffered horrendously and continue to suffer. So we appreciate that there are protesters here. That's part of the democratic process. We respect their right to be here, and we hope that remains peaceful. But it is the goal of the Democratic Party to bring peace and security not only to Israel, but to the region.
And of course, we know those conversations are ongoing. We'll still wait to hear more from Hamas as to whether or not it will agree. I'm also curious the conversations you're having related to your everyday job in Washington, obviously still on the August recess, but when you come back in September, it's going to be a race against the clock to avoid a government shutdown. Are you in conversations already with leadership and Republican leadership about how that's going to be avoided when you return to Washington in a few weeks? What exactly are you going to have to whip?
You know, I'm so glad you brought that out, because one thing we realized from the very start, when we were in the 15 rounds of Kevin McCarthy trying to become a speaker, that we are in the minority. So we have reached our hand out to them at every turn to say, work with us. Help us prevent shutdowns. Help us get to a budget process that matters. And what we have seen from them is a rejection of that and a move to try and coddle the most extreme members of their extreme party. And so it is really like such a basic fundamental job and responsibility of the House of Representatives to pass our budgets. And they have utterly failed to do that. So once again, it will be Democrats, as we have done repeatedly, who will keep government functioning, who will come to the table, forge a compromise, because we work for the American people. They are working to try and hold their own coalitions together. And that's the fundamental difference. We're seeing it play out around reproductive freedom for women. We're seeing it play out in bringing down the cost of groceries and housing, these issues that I hear about as I not only travel my district, but travel the country. That is what people are worried about. That is what they want to see in Congress. It's why we're going to win the majority back.
Meet us back in Washington so we can continue this conversation, Congresswoman. It's great to see you.
I'd love to.
Thanks for the time today on Bloomberg TV and radio. The House Minority Whip, Congresswoman Catherine Clark, in an important conversation on day 2 of the Democratic National Convention. I'm Joe Matthew alongside Kaylee Lyons with much more to follow. We're joined by Danny Wirtz, Michael Reinsdorf coming up next. This is Balance of Power, Bloomberg TV and radio.
Welcome back to Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm Kaylee Lyons alongside Joe Matthew, broadcasting to you live from Chicago, Illinois. Of course, the scene of this week's Democratic National Convention. Night one is in the books, of course, culminating in a late night speech from President Joe Biden. He's now left town, and we're getting ready for night two. And speeches from the second gentleman, Doug Emhoff, and both of the Obamas.
That's right. The DNC says they expect 50,000 people to descend on Chicago this week. And of course, only night two. There's a bit of a festive feeling in the air, right? We have some protesters around, but so far things have run fairly smoothly, if not just a bit late for the Democratic National Convention last night. Joe Biden didn't get on stage till 11:30 or something. I think the ovation went on till about midnight, Kaylee. But why don't we head over to the United Center right now? Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall has a closer look at what's happening today. Tyler?
Yeah, hey, Joe, we've been following a lot when it comes to commercial real estate here in the city of Chicago. We know that commercial real estate has been lagging in recent years since the pandemic. Vacancies are at record high rates, and some investors are now looking to see if any potential rate cuts in September could help unlock the commercial real estate market. For a sense of what's going on, you two caught up with Andy Glore, the CEO of Sterling Bay, one of those big real estate developers here in the city, for a sense of what needs to happen to spur more investment.
The commercial real estate business has been under a Category 5 storm for a few years now, okay, to say the least. And if you look at the real estate business, there's really, you can only control so many things. I think you need to, lower the cost of capital for people to start making investments back into these urban areas. And let's face it, if we need to get these cities back on track.
Now, one investment is already underway. You can see the United Center over my shoulder. That's at the center of one key revitalization effort in the city. The owners of the NBA Chicago Bulls and the NHL's Blackhawks are pouring in $7 billion for a multi-use development that would revamp this area around the arena in what's being called the 1901 project. It'll bring an estimated $9.5 billion in direct economic impact to the area. This is considered the largest private investment to date in West Chicago. Joe and Kaylee, I know that you're talking with two of the key stakeholders next, and I'm looking forward to that conversation.
Indeed, we are. Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall with a view at the United Center. Thank you so much. And Tyler is exactly right. We are joined now by Danny Wirtz, Chairman and CEO of the Chicago Blackhawks, alongside Michael Reinsdorf, President and CEO of the Chicago Bulls. They are both here with us on set in Chicago. Welcome to you both. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks for having
us. It is a power table.
I'm not so sure about that.
I don't know.
Indeed. Well, obviously it's a big week for you guys. I'm sure one that has had probably a year or so of preparation leading up to it. Michael, if we could just start with you, talk to us about the decision to host this convention at the United Center and what all has gone into it, and whether or not this is the most lucrative thing you could have done with a building of its size.
Well, I mean, clearly it's not the most lucrative thing we could do because we've shut down our buildings since the end of our season. So we've had we haven't booked any events for the last couple months. But to us, this was kind of a no-brainer when Governor Pritzker and Mayor Lightfoot came to us. We were on board from the very beginning. We had the convention kind of kicked off, I think, a lot of the redevelopment on the west side in '96. So the United Center was opened up in 1994. This is our 30th year. And the '96 convention was a complete success. And now it's many years later, and we want to do our part of supporting the city of Chicago that we love so much.
Fascinating. I'm really taken by the logistics behind something of this scale. You can throw a concert, you can host a game, but this is on a much larger level. You have 50,000 people attending, and I'm just curious what goes into that type of a transformation.
Tremendous planning, and the good thing is our team kind of at the United Center are used to these, 150 nights a year working games, concerts, etc., big events like All-Star games, but this is another level, and I know our team at the United Center kind of like the challenge of really rising to the occasion. And then, of course, it's partnerships. It's partnerships with all the city agencies and all the people that have to make it all work, and it's an impressive experience to go walk through, and just walking through last night and seeing all the pieces come together to make the event work.
Is it public service, though? Also, Kaylee references the fact that you could be making a lot more money doing something else.
Yeah, I think it's kind of in our DNA to step up and to do the right thing for the city, because when the city does well, we do well as a business, and these conventions are big opportunities to put the spotlight on our great city, to showcase what we do so well, and to bring people and bring business to Chicago.
Well, as we think about the work you're doing in Chicago, obviously you announced a few weeks ago, as Tyler mentioned, the 1901 project. You're investing more than $7 billion to revamp basically the area where now the area that surrounds the United Center. How do you fund that, as we're having a conversation here about money?
Well, we're going to fund it privately. We're lucky because the United Center is kind of the anchor tenant. So we have a chance to redevelop the land, the parking lots. So when we opened the building, we had 6,000 parking spaces available, and we didn't want to make it a sea of parking, but what happened was a lot of people bought parking, vacant lots and made additional parking. So we actually became kind of a sea of parking. And now we have this opportunity to reimagine this neighborhood. Danny and I've talked, this is not an entertainment district that you see in a lot of other cities with their buildings, their arenas and stadiums. This is an opportunity to do something different for the West Side. So it will be privately financed, and we're talking a lot of development, whether we're building a music hall, we're building hotels, affordable housing, open park space. I mean, it's kind of like Chicago's West Side. It's their time. It's our time.
There's a big conversation about crime in this campaign that you hear a lot about, I'm sure. The former president, Donald Trump, has been criticizing Chicago, using crime statistics in some of his speeches, and we have to acknowledge the reality of the matter. But when you consider an investment of that scale and you look at the geography, is it you build it and they will come? Well, the timing is what I'm curious about, considering the backdrop of your investment here when it comes to crime in Chicago.
Well, we have a long-term view. Danny, how long has your family been?
We've been here for almost 100 years, and I can tell you, crime has always been something that we've had to contend with and work with. But we also know that when we invest in the neighborhoods and when you invest in economic development, that is one way to help create opportunities that gets to sort of the root cause of some of the crime issues you see today. So I think Chicago has a history of really rolling up our sleeves and trying to be part of the solution, try to partner, with the public sector to figure out how do we create those opportunities to help, stem some of those problems from violence.
Yeah, you have to understand one thing. When the United Center opened, no one went west of the business district.
Yes, right.
And United Center opened in '94. Mayor Daley wanted to bring the convention to, make up for what happened in '68. 96 convention went off perfectly, and then all the development started happening. I don't think Fulton Market, which is just to the east of us, I don't think that necessarily happens without the United Center kickstarting all of this. So for us, we're not worried about the timing. We think the timing is right now.
Well, the timing for having the public cooperation with investing in things like stadiums, as we've seen evidenced by, say, the Chicago Bears, for example, doesn't seem to be great. There's been a lot of pushback in that. And I know you just said that you're planning to finance this privately, but what do you think about the dynamic surrounding the financing mechanism of these investments into sports facilities, or frankly, the facilities around them? If, as you say, this is about helping to invest economically that could help with things like crime.
Yeah, I think every situation is very different. Wherever you're looking to do your development has different opportunities, and I think it is that partnership, with the public to figure out where that benefit lies. We know in our situation, we own our land. We've owned our land for a long time. We've been part of this community for almost 100 years. So you have a good feel of what the neighborhood needs, how to find those nice trade-offs and those important trade-offs between our commerce and what we need from the community, and then you build it together. And I think other developments are putting that more at the forefront than ever before.
When you consider public-private partnership and just the role that you play in this city, you're no strangers to politics, which is what we talk about every day here on this program. Are politics making it more difficult to do business, or the conduit for your success?
I mean, for us, I think that there seems to be a lot of interest in our development. When we went to the mayor's office, we talked to the people, that surround him, our alderman, Walter Burnett. Everyone seemed to be on board. To me, this was almost like a no-brainer. I mean, you have group of people that want to spend $7 billion on a
They might
private
want to take
development.
that meeting.
Yeah,
But those relationships are long and important to you.
Of course. I mean, we have, we have friendships going back many, many years. Now we have a new mayor here who just became mayor last year, and we're developing a relationship with him. But like I said earlier, our families go back a long, long time, and we're about Chicago, not about the politics. Yeah. It's what can we do to make Chicago a better place?
Well, a lot of the politics today, or at least the political issues that seem to be dominating the narrative, certainly we're seeing this weekend in this election, surround the economy as well. We've seen such a change in the economy over the last 4 years from the pandemic, which obviously shut down facilities like the United Center for an extended period of time, to this resurgence in demand for that experience economy. People wanted to go to live events like sports games and concerts. Now we're all asking this question of whether or not the softening is finally upon us in the labor market and potentially in consumption as a result. Are you seeing any signs of that in a waning of demand, or is there still demand to go
I think for
do expensive things in person?
For sports and entertainment, I think it seems like every year is bigger than the last year. I think we had a record year for other events outside of our two teams last season. We obviously hear across the board, Lollapalooza had record attendance this year for live music and festivals. So again, I think that desire to be connected, that desire for experience, and people willing to pay for it is still there. So at least in that part of the business, for sure, we see some nice tailwinds, whereas other parts of the business, we definitely see some of those.
Yeah, I think it's helped that in the music industry changed so much over the years that before putting out albums was where you made the money. Now it's touring. So now you have all these acts, and so every year it seems like we're getting more and more acts. I mean, how many different concerts did we do last year? I
think we're almost 80 different concerts.
I mean, it's kind of crazy. And so now we're building this music hall, which is a 6,000 seat venue, and that's going to get some of the smaller acts. And we don't see a softening right now. I mean,
and especially in markets like Chicago, which seems to be able to absorb a tremendous amount of live events and entertainment.
Sure.
Chicago loves its sports, so we feel pretty good about where we're at here.
But it's an interesting take that you have just broadly beyond even spending on events, sports, and concerts. You don't see a consumer prepared to slow down or more wary about conditions.
I think what we see is that you better make sure that you are delivering a special experience. From the time that someone gets into their car or takes the train or takes their ride sharing to, parking the car, going into the building, getting their food, getting their drinks, we better make sure that it is a top quality experience, and that's some of the biggest challenges we have, because we don't control the traffic. We don't control certain things. We don't control when it's a blizzard in the middle of winter. Probably one of the great things about this DNC is that it's in the summer, right? Not here in the winter.
I have to say the weather right now is certainly preferable to
We ordered it up for you guys. Yeah,
thank you.
I want to ask as well, because something we just saw happen in Washington last year was the purchase of a sports team for a pretty rich valuation in the Commanders. We've seen the valuations seem to go up in general, and I wonder if you think this is something that is sustainable, how you're considering your own valuation for the Blackhawks at this time, if you've been having any conversations with private equity about these kind of things. Can you just shed some light on that, Danny?
I'm fourth generation owner of our family. I think one of the longest contiguous owners of a major sports franchise in all of sports. And for us, it's something we just hold really dear to our family. So we're sort of in a very unique situation from an ownership standpoint, which of course the interests in these very coveted licenses are driving those values up. So we love the valuation, but it doesn't necessarily change our strategy to continue to hold and develop and grow our family asset for another few generations.
And what about for the Bulls?
For the Bulls, I mean, we're the Chicago Bulls. Why would we want to get out of being part of the Chicago Bulls? I mean, we were probably the first global sports franchise in the world, thanks to Michael Jordan. Right. So for our family and for our investors, our partners, we're not interested in being a seller. Is it nice that the valuations of these teams are going up? Sure, but at the same time, we're not going to realize any of that because the Bulls aren't going anywhere.
Well, we have another big sports deal in Washington, D.C., and that was Ted Leonsis' teams deciding to stay in Washington and a massive deal to kind of rebuild the neighborhood. He talked to us about the challenges of moving buildings, changing spaces that allow people to flow into a new area that they might not be going to otherwise. You're facing something similar here when you've got a river in the way, you've got a couple of things. How do you envision this project in Western Chicago in a way that will actually bring the flow of people to your
So
events?
I actually think the hardest part was 30 years ago, as Michael said, crossing that threshold to come to the West Side to see an event. And, over 70 years, people got used to coming to the Chicago Stadium, but it didn't offer a lot on the way. Where we're at now, the growth happening on the West Side of Chicago is tremendous. Fulton Market is the most explosive neighborhood in the city of Chicago. That's right at our doorstep. The growth of the Illinois Medical District just south of us. So there's momentum here, and there's a lot of other things happening around this development that I think gave us the confidence that the energy is coming and the energy's here.
And the infrastructure's in
place.
place.
Infrastructure. And now that's an area where I think the city's very interested in really understanding what the infrastructure needs are to make sure we can continue to bring people here through the various forms of transportation, that we have all the things we need for this to be, a continued vibrant neighborhood.
What a treat to have this much time. Thank you both for being so generous. A great conversation here.
You. Yeah.
This is why we came to Chicago.
That's right.
Danny Wirtz, Michael Reinsdorf. Great to see both of you, and thank you for being with us. On Balance of Power, Bloomberg TV and radio, we are live from Chicago, day 2 of the Democratic National Convention. We want to make sure we keep up to date on the markets right now. Bloomberg's Abigail Doolittle has more from New York. Hi, Abigail.
Hi, Joe. Well, it's shaping up to be a bit of a soggy day here for stocks. We've had the S&P 500 going up and down, right now down about 0.25%. Making that interesting is the fact that it is the first down day in 9, so breaking the best winning streak for the S&P 500 going back to 2022 and the longest since November of last year. We have bigger declines for the chip area, down 1.7%. This comes as NVIDIA is down almost about 2%, and then the Russell 2000, those small cap stocks, more domestically based, down 1.2%. Now, I suspect that the NVIDIA weakness has to do with something specific. Overall this week, very macro, of course, the DNC, election 2024, but we also have lots of liquidity concerns on our hands, including the Fed later this week, Jackson Hole, Fed Chairman Jay Powell. But right now we have something happening with the yen because, of course, a couple of weeks ago when we had stocks down sharply, we really had a steep correction. It had everything to do with the unwind of the yen carry trade. We're seeing a little bit of that today. It's not being referenced that way because it's not violent in the way that it had been before. But over the last 3 days, we have the dollar yen down more than 2%. That is another way of saying that the haven yen is strengthening, so that cheap money trade, well, it's just not happening. If recent lows were broken, it could really bring another big correction for stocks. We're not seeing that right now, but the fact that you do have the Russell 2000 and NVIDIA underperforming speaks to the idea that some investors really are eyeing this strengthening yen and maybe a little bit concerned that we could, in fact, see a reprisal or a return of that unwind of the yen carry trade. But of course, it is DNC week and election 2024. Lots of volatility, uncertainty. There's about a 10% betting odds difference between VP Harris and Donald Trump, with VP Harris on top. Relative to the Harris trade and the Trump trade, though, today, each of these trades is lower. Relative to that Harris trade, we're still trying to figure it out, but relative to that economic policy or the skeleton of it that was revealed last week, $1.7 trillion, capping prices at the grocery store, offering $25,000 down payment assistance for first-time home buyers. We see weakness for the groceries, so that actually is positive for the Harris trade. It suggests that investors are taking that seriously. On the other hand, home builders lower. And then take a look at DJT, down 2.1%. So the Trump trade certainly not in place, actually below its SPAC opening, Kaylee. So it's interesting to see some of this weakness across the board. And of course, that VIX, it's not really elevated, but around election 2024, and we'll take a look at this next hour, it's closer to an 18, 19, 20 handle, showing that investors do have their eye on the uncertainty coming up in November.
All right, Abigail Doolittle, always with an eye on the VIX and DJT and everything else in financial markets we need to be appraised of. Thank you so much joining us from New York. Meantime, of course, the convention continues here in Chicago, and it'll be interesting to see the tone shift that happens on this evening, night 2, after night 1. It was dedicated to the current president, Joe Biden, by and large, with signs of I Love Joe on the convention floor. He's now out of town, and now it becomes much more about Kamala Harris and Tim Walz.
That's true. It's a good place to start with the panel here, Kaylee, because it was an important moment, and frankly, not a lot of Americans saw this live. Joe Biden didn't get on stage till 11:30 last night, and as we said, the ovation might have lasted till midnight. Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano are with us right now, Bloomberg Politics contributors. Rick, partner at Stone Court Capital. Jeannie, of course, political science professor at Iona University. Welcome to day two. Rick, were you getting agita as someone who ran a convention watching this thing go overtime last night?
Yeah, I was on a group chat with a bunch of guys who helped me organize the 2008 convention, and we were all talking by about 9 or 10 o'clock. This thing is really off the rails. It's way late.
What does it mean when you're canceling speakers in prime time?
It's a real embarrassment to the campaign organization, to the program committee of the convention. This thing is supposed to be accounted for. Every second of the schedule is written down, debated, and rehearsed. And the fact that they were off by 45 minutes to an hour and a half is just like a criminal offense in politics. So I think that there was probably a lot of come to Jesus meetings this morning around the program for tonight. And it'll be interesting if they can make their marks tonight, get past it. But if they can't, this could be like the 1992 convention for Republicans in Houston, where Ronald Reagan was pushed into midnight out of the prime time slot, which was supposed to be his last hurrah.
Well, I don't know how much of this can be contributed to or blamed on overstuffing the schedule, perhaps, or just not, when you're doing those calculations on time, accounting for how many chants of thank you, Joe, you might have to get through before the president actually were to start speaking. Jeannie, I'd love for you to just reflect on the reception he got in that room last night and whether it makes it frankly better or worse from him, knowing that he is on his way out.
Yeah, it was an amazing reception. But first of all, they bumped sweet baby James for Jamie Raskin and, I don't know, Chris Coons. And I love them both. But, you know, let's get James Taylor back. I think tonight we will see a tighter schedule. Let's hope. To your point, there was a lot of applause for Joe Biden, but it wasn't only that. Not only did they have a lot of speakers, but some of these speeches went so long and they were saying sort of perfunctory things sometimes, like, you know, help me elect Kamala Harris. Well, we all know we're doing that. So there's some nitpicking I could do on the way that this rolled out. But overall, a really warm reception for Joe Biden. These are all his delegates. You know, he's done something quite extraordinary in stepping aside for Kamala Harris. It was not the speech I thought I was going to get. I thought I was going to get more, here's what it's like to work with Kamala Harris. Here's
what I've done.
Here's who I am. And here's what I've done. But besides that, he's done an extraordinary thing. It was his moment. But you just see when she came out like a rock star last night, that's where the energy is. And I was saying to Rick earlier, imagine if that had been Joe Biden still at the top of the ticket Thursday night, the difference in terms of the reception.
Boy, how true. A lot of things have changed. And one of the more enduring images of last evening, beyond what Jeannie just described, Sean Fain, who runs the United Auto Workers, tearing his shirt open a la Hulk Hogan to show a T-shirt that says, Trump is a scab. And that apparently is going to be a refrain that we hear a lot in this campaign. Is it effective?
Yeah, I don't think the ripping off the blue blazer to show a T-shirt intact was exactly the emotional Hulk Hogan moment. But there's only one Hulk Hogan. Yeah, look, I think that last night actually echoed all the basic themes of the Democratic Party. You had a lot about union labor, right? As if there is no other kind of labor in America but union labor. And I think that's a dangerous place for the Democrats to go, to say that it's only union labor that we speak to. Two, I thought that actually they did an amazing job talking about abortion, putting a public face on it. Republicans didn't talk about abortion at all at the Milwaukee convention, and you would have thought that was something that would get Republicans excited. So what we saw last night was the base politics. You know, what is going to get our people excited? Not a lot of crossover appeal there at all last night.
Well, something else we heard a lot about, in addition to those themes, Rick, was Project 2025. We've heard a lot about this on the campaign trail thus far, but certainly it was a common theme in some of these convention speeches. Here's a little taste.
Donald Trump appointed the Supreme Court justices who got us into this mess. His Project 2025 goes even further. Here's the thing. Trump and Vance simply don't believe in your freedom.
While Trump falsely pleads ignorance of Project 2025, which in my opinion is Jim Crow 2.0, Kamala has been offering the American people enlightened proposals and visionary leadership.
Donald Trump and the Republican friends, they not only can't think, they can't read very well. Seriously, think about it. Look at their Project 2025. They want to do away with the Department of Education.
Rick, I want to come to you on this first because obviously Donald Trump has now taken pains to distance himself from Project 2025. But given the messaging we're getting out of this convention, is it too late for him to create that separation, knowing many of the authors of this project do have close ties to him?
Yeah, it's really quite a phenomenon because you wouldn't think something like this would actually go mainstream, right? It's kind of a club issue, right? Republicans and Democrats in high places talk about these policy things and it very rarely seeps out into the electorate. But in this case, pollster after pollster I've talked to says 2025 is showing up in their verbatims. You know, that people are worried about this plan. They're afraid of it. And they couldn't articulate anything that was in it, but they know it's a bad thing. And so it's actually become a mainstream issue. And I think by virtue of that, Trump's already behind the curve. And do you really want to debate 2025, a plan that people think is a negative plan? So I think that it's going to hurt Republicans. I wouldn't suggest that anybody invest heavily in that. But I think the funniest part is there's a big Trump Tower in Chicago, and they were broadcasting in lights, headquarters of 2025 on the front of it.
I think also
it's
Weird
everywhere.
as Hell was
Yes,
on there.
indeed. Some interesting projections on the buildings walking around Chicago at night. But wait, Rick makes a great point. This is pretty esoteric stuff. And we're hearing people talk about it on a level, Jeannie, I would suggest, Kaylee, that every reference to Project 2025 on the air gets a more vitriolic response on social media, for instance, from both sides of the aisle. How did Democrats make this a thing?
Yeah, it's fascinating. I just wrote a piece on this, and the reason why was because when I was in Europe this summer, the number one question, to Rick's point, that I was asked from just people on the street, friends, colleagues, what do you think about Project 2025? And to your point, I couldn't get over how this had spread. And, you know, my view of this is that it is quite an opportunity for Democrats. I have read through this, and it is long. And what you find in there are disagreements, fundamental disagreements among the Republican Party about critical issues. I wrote about Ukraine, for instance, which divides about 12 ways at this point. So I think of it as an opportunity for Democrats, not just to keep raising it in the way they are, but to try to pull over some folks who might otherwise, if they care about these issues, might go Republican, but they care so much about an issue like Ukraine that they're willing to think about voting the other side, whether it's Senate, House, or the presidency. So it is an opportunity, and Donald Trump knows this, which is why he's trying to walk away from it. But Democrats are saying this week, not so fast. We shall broadcast on Trump Tower.
Well, Jeannie, as you talk about drawing people over, and I raised this conversation with another one of our Democratic strategists we speak to frequently, Kristen Hahn, yesterday, this notion that the people who are here in Chicago are the hardcore Democrats. They were going to vote for the Democratic ticket no matter who it was, if it was Biden or Harris. It is not their enthusiasm that you need. So as everybody comes in confident saying, look at how enthusiastic and energized we all are, those aren't the people you need energized, right? You need to reach out to the people who aren't making the trip to Chicago necessarily, who are still on the fence. Do Democrats risk being too celebratory this week and not doing enough reaching out to those who still may not have their minds made up?
Absolutely. And this is where I felt so nitpicky last night because they were speaking, in my view, many of them. And I would put Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez as an exception to this. I think whatever you think of her, she gave a great speech, not substantive necessarily, but in terms of speaking to the audience at home. Because a lot of what happens is like we're watching in the room, you can hear what the crowd is saying and all that stuff. And the speakers are talking to these folks, and it's all of the delegates for Biden and Harris and now Waltz. But at home, people can't hear what's going on the floor. You've got to speak to the people at home. To your point, I didn't find that happened enough last night. I think that's why it dragged on and on and on. They've got to ride that applause, speak over it, and speak to the people at home. And they can't make this about an Acela corridor speech. It's got to be, we're in Chicago, it's got to be to the folks who are going to decide this thing, the independents, moderates in these 7 swing states. So I thought Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, coach her, did I just say her? Very, very effective last night in terms of the way that they spoke.
It's a good placement. Well, that's the crossover that you were talking about earlier. Rick, you've had to strike that balance. Tonight, it's Barack Obama, ironically, as I sit here with Rick Davis. Is he the one for that job?
You know, probably not. And Monday nights are usually like that infernal speak. That's not a surprise. But I think tonight is a really important point that Jeannie's making. I think they really need to open it up. Remember, in 2020, Barack Obama leveled a heavy attack on Donald Trump as being, the end of democracy. Yeah. And a lot of people at the time thought, wow, that's really over the top. I mean, like, this was quite a leveling of an attack on him. And the question for me tonight is, does he reprise his role as a attack dog on Donald Trump, the visionary who has been there, done that, and can, sort of guide the American public, this group that's still trying to make up its mind, who will determine the outcome of the election, not the people in that convention hall. And how will he speak to them about the perils of Donald Trump?
What's interesting is that as he speaks, as Michelle Obama speaks, as the second gentleman speaks, Kamala Harris and Tim Walz will not actually be in the convention hall to hear it. They will kind of be counter-programming as they also speak in prime time at a rally in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. If you were running this campaign, Rick, would you not have staggered these events so you get the coverage of the rally in the afternoon and then you get the primetime network coverage of the speeches? What do you make of this call?
I think this is really strange. You're counter-programming. That means you don't like the programming in your hall, so you're going somewhere else to get it. That's usually what Republicans do at a convention for Democrats. And it's a crowd event. 18,000 people are going to fill that stadium in Milwaukee, just like the Republican convention. And I think it's a very strange thing. Bad use of money, right? You got a convention hall full of people. You want to go talk to somebody. There they are, right across the river. But the bottom line is she's going to get a moment of her time tonight without actually being in the convention hall. And that's unusual, and I can see the value of that. She's still trying to introduce herself to the American public. And this way, she gets to talk to the people Jeannie's talking about, the undecided voters in a targeted state.
Well, to Kaylee's point, she's supposed to talk at 9 p.m. Eastern. Who are we watching tonight?
We're going to split that screen, Joe Matthew. I think it's very strange. Like, it would have made total sense if it was in the afternoon, or maybe on Friday. She leaves Thursday, goes there. She does need to be in Wisconsin, obviously. She needs to be making these speeches. She needs to take it to Donald Trump. Nothing drives him crazy like her getting a crowd where he just had his convention. But the timing is very, very odd. And the fact that her husband is speaking here, that, you've got the former president, it's strange. Now, do you think maybe they changed the time? I don't know how, but at this point, it's a strange way to schedule things is all I can say.
Unless they're counting on the schedule here running late. Perhaps all the primetime speeches won't actually conflict.
Breakfast with Obama.
Who knows? Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano here for breakfast, lunch, and dinner with us. Basically, we are all spending all of our time together here in Chicago as we broadcast live from the Democratic National Convention. We have a lot more coming up in the next hour. In addition to Rick and Jeannie, we'll be joined by Congressman Seth Moulton of Massachusetts.
Yeah, one of the real fiery moments last night when you saw some anger from Joe Biden was he got one of the suckers and losers line talking about Donald Trump's references to veterans. We'll get into that with the congressman from Massachusetts, a Marine Corps combat veteran.
And we have more guests, too, including Fatima Goss-Graves of the National Women's Law Center and the co-chair of the Rules and Bylaw Committee for this convention will be joining us as well. Bishop Leah Daughtry will be with us, so stick with us. We'll be back in just a few minutes right here on Bloomberg TV and radio.
offers jobs day like Bloomberg. From the world of politics to the world of business, this is Balance of Power. Live from the Democratic National Convention in Chicago.
From Bloomberg Studios in Chicago at the Democratic National Convention to our TV and radio audiences worldwide. Welcome to Balance of Power. Alongside Joe Matthew, I'm Kaylee Lyons. It is day 2, which is also night 2, which of course is when we're going to hear from former President Barack Obama, the former First Lady Michelle Obama, and the current second gentleman of the United States, Doug Emhoff, who will be headlining tonight after the headliner of the first night, the President of the United States, Joe Biden, who has now left town and is on vacation in California.
Yeah, Joe Biden has left the building. It went late last night. He left the city and the state as well, Kaylee, to allow the proceedings now to begin in a windup that will bring Kamala Harris Thursday night to her acceptance speech, her formal acceptance speech. Barack Obama will be holding forth later, the former president, who might have some stern words for Donald Trump, by the way, counter-programming this convention throughout the week. Today, he is back in Michigan, something that we'll be talking about later. He's got an event on crime, of course, with Chicago in mind.
Yeah, something the Republicans are hitting very hard, but Democrats were taking a fair number of shots at their own about the Republican Party in general, and specifically the former president. We got a lot of those from President Biden last night, including some pretty powerful, emotional words about what Donald Trump has said about veterans.
Guess who doesn't get it and doesn't respect our veterans? We know from his own chief of staff, the 4-star General John Kelly, that Trump, when in Europe, would not go to the grave sites in France. The brave service members who gave their lives to this country. He called them suckers and losers. Who in the hell does he think he is? Who does he think he is? There's no words for a person. They're not the words of a person not worthy of being commander-in-chief, period. Not then, not now, and not ever. I mean that. I mean that from the bottom of my heart.
President Biden last evening in one of the more dramatic moments of his address, and it's where we start our conversation now with Congressman Seth Moulton, the Democrat from Massachusetts, has arrived in Chicago. And of course, if you've been with us before, you're aware of his time as a Marine combat veteran serving 4 tours in Iraq. So a unique perspective that we always enjoy sharing, Congressman. It's great to see you in Chicago. Thanks for being here. Yeah. This clearly made Joe Biden angry. How does it make you feel?
Well, I mean, we all know how important Beau Biden's service is to Joe Biden as a father, as a commander-in-chief, as an American. And it is really remarkable that you have a major party candidate in Donald Trump who just truly hates veterans. And that's not an exaggeration. He has shown time and time and again. He's called us losers and suckers. In other words, losers for signing up, suckers if you get killed. He was walking around Arlington Cemetery with his own chief of staff, Marine veteran John Kelly, when he said, I just don't understand why they did it. What was in it for them? And this, while John Kelly was there in part to see his own son's grave, Lieutenant Kelly, who died in Afghanistan.
Well, whatever you may think about his attitude toward veterans, he does have a veteran running with him in J.D. Vance. Kamala Harris also has a veteran running with her in Tim Walz, and yet his service record has come under immense scrutiny since his selection. J.D. Vance has framed it as stolen valor.
Well, because J.D. Vance is following Donald Trump's playbook of denigrating veterans. And we should be celebrating the fact that, you know, for the first time in a long time, we have 2 veterans on the major party candidates. The first time that we've had veterans really from these most recent wars. And that's something that we should be celebrating. And, you know, both J.D. Vance and Tim Walz have service records that should be lifted up and used as examples. Instead, J.D. Vance is just going down the same path as Donald Trump and attacking the service record of Tim Walz, who by all accounts was a great soldier in the Army.
Well, look, we saw this with your former colleague, John Kerry from Massachusetts, the Swift boats. Of course, we've got some of the same people involved in the messaging in this campaign, and Chris Lasavita, who was part of the Swift boats campaign back in 2004. I was compelled by Mark Kelly's response to all of this. He clearly was not happy with this stolen valor accusation, but he said both of you should be thanked for your service. J.D. Vance.
That's right.
And Tim Walz. Is that the way we should approach it?
Exactly. And that's what I just said. I mean, we should be lifting up the fact that both of them have served the country in different and important ways. And, you know, what veterans really hate is other veterans who misrepresent their service, who make their record out to be more than it is. And that fundamentally is what J.D. Vance is trying to accuse Tim Walz of, but it just doesn't hold water. It doesn't hold water at all. And it's not really the way that veterans respect each other. Serving in Congress, I have a lot of veterans on the other side of the aisle that I disagree with on a lot of policy issues, and yet they're often the first people I go to work with. Like if I have to do, work on a piece of bipartisan legislation, like the 988 National Mental Health Hotline. Now it's part of the Veterans Crisis Line as well. I co-authored that bill with an Air Force veteran from Utah. There are a lot of issues we disagreed on, but he was one of the first people I went to work with on that legislation because I knew as a result of our shared service, we had something in common. We had some trust that we shared, some common experience. Even though we did very different things, as an infantry officer in the Marines, as a world record-holding pilot in the Air Force. Chris Stewart was an amazing partner. In many ways, much more distinguished military record than mine. I'm not in the Guinness Book of World Records for anything from my time in the Marines. But the point is that we found that common ground, and you would like to see that happening on the presidential stage. But of course, J.D. Vance is just going down in the gutter with Donald Trump. He's much more interested in following Donald Trump's playbook than upholding the values that he should have learned in the Marines.
Well, Congressman, obviously we thank you for your service and all those who have served or are currently serving. And in recent weeks, Joe and I have had to ask some pretty tough questions about those who are currently serving and whether or not they may have to become active in combat in the Middle East once again, as we cast an eye on Iran, which still has yet to retaliate against Israel, and wait for progress on a potential ceasefire between Israel and Hamas. That, of course, is something Joe Biden wants to achieve with the remaining time as president. He spoke about that on the convention floor last night. Just take a listen briefly to his words.
And we'll keep working to bring hostages home and end the war in Gaza and bring peace and security to the Middle East. We're working around the clock, my Secretary of State, to prevent a wider war and reunite hostages with their families and surge humanitarian health and food assistance into Gaza now. To end the civilian suffering of the Palestinian people and finally deliver a ceasefire and end this war.
Now, Israel, of course, has accepted this bridge ceasefire proposal from the U.S. Hamas at this time has not. Are you confident that it can be done, or are you still worried that potentially the U.S. could get involved in a deeper conflict in the Middle East?
No, look, I'm very concerned. And it is, let's just be clear.